Yiti is the largest and most prominent nation east of the Bones. Its size, wealth, and diversity rival that of the Seven Kingdoms and the Valerian Freehold, while its age dwarfs both of them. Known as the Golden Empire, Yiti is made up of green patchwork farmland, verdant rainforest, basilisk-infested jungles, and great coastal cities like Yin and Jinqui, and desert cities like Tikwi. It is fiercely contested whether civilization began with the Fisher Kings of the grasslands or with the Empire of the Dawn, the ancestral name of Yiti. Regardless, Maester Yandel notes that the rise of Yiti brought with it the first formulation of reading, writing, trade, and social governance, and it marks a definitive point in humanity's transition from savagery to society. During ancient times, Yiti was ruled over by a single emperor, who was believed to be the son of two gods, the Lion of Night and the Maiden Maid of Light. The first god emperor traveled throughout his realm carried by his 100 queens and was worshipped by his people. His descendants, however, held shorter reigns and presided over more troubled and fractured kingdom, increasingly bothered by invasions and rebellions. While present-day Yiti is still officially ruled over by a god emperor, in practice, day-to-day governance is carried out by the princes, priests, warlords, and tax collectors of each region. So, what do we think of Yiti? It's kind of the most obvious allusion to ancient China, I think.
Yep, yeah. Absolutely.
One thing that I found interesting was when you think of Yiti and the ancient conflict between the Chinese Empire and the Mongolian Empire, the whole reason why they created the Great Wall of China was to keep out the steppe tribes. But here, that there's the whatever the closest thing to the Great Wall equivalent, which is what seems to be the five forts, was meant for a very different purpose. So that didn't happen in this iteration of China and.
Yeah, well, thoughts? I guess there weren't any mountains to sort of build on, because the Great Wall's sort of an extension of a mountain range, isn't that right? And it's just plains between Yiti and Jogosnai.
Yeah. Well, is it? I mean, there's a lot of parts of the Great Wall of China that's not a very mountainous region. That's the whole reason why they made the Great Walls, because they didn't have any natural formations that could give them an advantage for defense, right?
But between like Jogosnai and Yiti, there's just nothing. It's just no trace of mountains, so it looks like it'd be really hard to build any sort of like big wall structure.
Oh, because that's where you get the raw resources from?
Yeah, there isn't really described as any kind of fortification.
Also, it seems like
I guess the jungle
with the,
sort of a...
Oh, sorry. With the Mongols, it seems like the Yiti and the Jogosnai have been existing for thousands of years, constantly fighting. Like, it's almost like they know each other, they know their strengths and weaknesses. The Mongols kind of like came out of nowhere in a very relatively short period of time and took over a lot of China, as far as I know. I mean, I know more about the Western history than Eastern, but it seems like here, like I said, they kind of know each other, and like they figured out a system. They raid us, we fight back. It just goes back and seems like it's just been swaying back and forth for thousands of years, except for that one time where they almost killed them all.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, like I would say it depends on how you define a long time. I mean, because the Mongolian, the history of and the interrelations between ancient Mongolians and ancient Chinese, there was periods where conquering Mongolian Khan was basically started kind of his own. That was like the Ming Dynasty, or so it was one of the dynasties that was its own dynasty. Was kind of came from the Mongolians. So according to my ignorant listening to Dan Carlin's Hardcore History of the Mongolian Empire and the Marco Polo series, there actually is quite an extended back and forth relationship between the Mongolian, like the steppe tribes of Asia and the
they
Chinese
lived there.
Empire.
Obviously, they were their neighbors, but like kind of like the Romans, how like they kept the German tribes fighting amongst each other because they knew if they ever reunited, they could cause trouble, and that eventually happened. But I feel here it wasn't until Genghis Khan was the guy in charge and decided, hey, we're not going to fight among ourselves. We're going to go, try to take out China, that they caused all the damage and started burning cities to the ground. But that seemed like that happened. That's what I meant when I said like it happened quick. Once it started conquering, that seems like that happened in a couple generations rather than hundreds of tens of generations.
Which is what perhaps spurred the impetus for the Great Wall of China. Whereas perhaps that never happened in this case.
Mm-hmm.
But their wall, the five forts, that's very interesting because I should have reread it. Is it fused blackstone or oily blackstone that it's made out of?
I don't think. Yeah. I had a question here because I think they don't say specifically that the forts are made out of the oily blackstone, but they do say how they're like untouched by time, and they're not. They don't like erode like regular stone does. I had a whole thing pointed out here.
They're described as being fused with blackstone, but it never says oily blackstone because the Valerians also used blackstone, I think, in some of their structures, such as the Long Bridge of Volantis and the Valerian roads, I think, but they're not quite the same as the freaky supernatural stuff we find around.
Yeah,
but I think
blackstone oily. But
blackstone did require the Valerian blackstone did require dragonfire to create, I think.
I think it has to be different,
two
right?
types,
Because the
it seems.
Valyrians are relatively recent compared to these guys, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
but
I'm
the
just
thing-
interested
who
where
says-
this came from.
The thing
Well,
is,
Blackstone is not. The Blackstone was not. It's not known to be a Valyrian product, like the same way Valyrian steel is.
No,
Right?
but like they try to do some like Valyrian, rewriting of history here, where they say, certain scholars from the West have suggested Valyrian involvement in the construction of the Five Forts, but the Five Forts predate the Freehold's rise, and it says there's no record of any dragon lords going that far east, and that's where they say.
And it's possible.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, and there's no
Right, and
record
it's
of
also
any
possible
dragon lords.
Blackstone predates the Valyrian
It seems like the
as well. We
Blackstone
don't know.
predates everything. Like it's that whatever
Yeah.
ancient
Right, so
civilization.
we don't know. We don't know if the Blackstone is like a Valyrian product, so it could all be the same thing and have nothing really to do with Valyrian, right?
I never thought that the
Yes.
Blackstone was
No,
Valyrian, but we know that they can use their magic and dragons to make like Dragonstone
No, but-
was basically made in the image of
Is-
some of this older.
Isn't there a specific substance called Valerian stone that's black, and that's what was
Yeah.
used to make the Valerian roads?
Well, there's Valyrian stone, which is what they made the Valyrian roads from. I don't know if that's the same oily black stone.
No, that's what I'm
This-
saying. That's what I'm saying. It's not the same. It's different.
Right.
It's not oily.
Right.
And neither is the stone in the Five Forts described as oily. But as Maester Yandel says, there's no evidence of the Valerians going that far. So either the Yeti have figured out their own way of creating that same substance, maybe they have access to dragons, or it's something completely different. I'm not sure.
Well, we do know that it says right here that for the Great Walls of the Five Forts are single slabs of fused black stone. They don't say oily, but they
Here we go.
single
Okay.
slabs of fused black stone. So in that sense, they are similar.
But yeah, it's just a question. Who built these? Because it probably wasn't the Valyrians. It must have been something else. So yeah,
and I hope we never
raises
It
a lot
probably-
of questions that we don't have some
Probably
answers
wasn't
to.
even the ET. It almost seems like they were already there when like the ET civilization, kind of grew up. Like I don't think the people from ET built this either. They were just kind of always there,
Well, speaking of Blackstone, it is written that thousands of years ago, the Bloodstone Emperor was a monstrous tyrant who almost destroyed the people of ET. Along with slaying his older sister in order to claim the throne, the Bloodstone Emperor took a tiger woman for his bride, practiced torture, necromancy, and cannibalism, and cast aside ET's traditional gods in order to worship a black stone that had fallen from the sky. This worship gave rise to the sinister Church of Starry Wisdom, which still persists to this day in many port cities. The Bloodstone Emperor was said to usher in an age of darkness called the Long Night, in which the Lion of Night unleashed his fury upon the realms of men, and the Maiden Maid of Light turned her back on their anguish. It was only after the fabled hero, known variously as Azor Ahai, Hero, Yintar, Nefarian, and Eldric Shadow Chaser arose to lead the race of men against the forces of darkness, that the Long Night finally ended. So this guy seems very much like the same way that the Five Forts are like the Wall. This guy seems like a parallel to the Night's King in Westeros. It's interesting how the mythology of two so separate civilizations with no communication could have such common mythology.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think the difference, obviously, is that this Blood Emperor didn't really sound like he used things like White Walkers or like whites. It just kind of seems like he was this, like almost like a Maegor the Cruel type guy who killed his own sister and was kind of this asshole of a rule,
yeah.
and not really like a supernatural monster that brought these other supernatural zombie monsters to come fuck everyone up. I'm not sure if I pictured it quite that way.
Well, the idea of marrying a tiger bride does sort of evoke the idea of marrying some sort of, non-human woman, like, the Night's King marries a corpse bride or something. So there is that sinister kind of parallel. And it's described as demons being beyond the Five Forts. And that's why they were erected, to keep the demons out. So maybe he harnessed those demons in some way.
Yeah.
I mean, and you very well could be right. The reason why I didn't picture a tiger bride in the same way as like a corpse bride is because the use of tiger in ancient Asian history is actually very common. So in like Korean folklore and Chinese folklore, a tiger bride or like a tiger king or someone with like tiger ancestry is actually very common because tigers were native to that area. So when I heard Tiger Bright, to me that just meant like this unique tribe of perhaps savagely harsh people that wore tiger pelts or something like that. I didn't think of like some supernatural thing.
So it implies like a savage person.
Right.
Okay, sure.
But you could very well be right. I don't know.
It does seem to suggest that if these are the others or a different type of other, that they have a continuous agenda of sort of corrupting human leaders and sort of getting them married off to, someone on their side maybe, and that's one of their ways of sort of bringing down human civilization, I guess.
Yeah, but unlike the Night's King, it doesn't necessarily seem like there's much sort of influence necessarily. This guy seems to just be corrupt. He's corrupted by some evil force. Although maybe the evil force is like the black stone that came from the sky. Like that's what did it. It's like this ring of power kind of thing that just fell into his lap and it starts corrupting.
And that kind of goes. I mean, we can get into the Lovecraft references, later on when we get to Lang and Ashai. But one of Lovecraft's most famous stories is The Color Out of Space, which is literally where this like meteor lands and it basically infects the land and causes all this trouble and people to start dying and it just literally like poisons the land. So that might be another Lovecraft allusion there.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Did someone have a question about Lomas Longstrider and like the inconsistencies about, like the encyclopedia says Lomas Longstrider never made it past the Bone Mountains.
I had a question,
he did.
but I didn't know if that said. I was confused as just the way it was worded, where it says he like quailed at the mountains and thought it was the end of the world, but then kept going. But it didn't say that. I assumed like that was as far as he got. But then he's writing about Ashai and all these other places beyond it. So I assumed he went. It was just the way it was worded seemed a little strange to me.
I think the wording is he lost heart at the side of the Bone Mountains, but I don't think it ever says he turned back. So either he kept going or he went around the mountains, maybe through the Jade Sea, to get up to the Giant
I mean, I can't imagine that being a mistake that would stay in the text. Like, oh yeah, he didn't get there, but he actually went there. So it's probably just the wording.
I would love to see, just based on the information that we've come across in the encyclopedia, if any of us could actually get like fictionally transported to the world of Westeros, I would love to actually read the Jade Compendium. That sounds like a very interesting book.
I want to read all these books that we can't have.
I would love to also
talking to Howland Reed. Read the Jade Compendium and talk to Howland Reed. All of your answers.
He's got a good library at Grey River to watch, I'm sure. Although
He's got
the
all
paper
these
won't
notes.
hold up too well in those climates, but.
I wonder if HBO got really desperate and they're one really great idea for Game of Thrones related sister series would just be like the Adventures of Lomas Longstrider.
I hope they do Duncan Egg before Lomas Longstrider, but maybe eventually.
Yeah.
Right, but you see how endless the stories are in George R. R. Martin's Planetos. It's just endless.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sure they're going to go back and mine it for the reigns of Castamere, Mad King Aerys's reign. Just there's so many things that HBO will want to continue it with. Yeah, because they're greedy and money hungry.
Can you imagine a series of Lomas Longstrider like coming across ET? Like that would be insane. Like that would just be so fantastical. Even in the case of the Game of Thrones Planetos, it would be fantastical even just for that, Visiting Ashai, that would sound insane.
Yeah, but I also feel like they're more powerful not seeing them. Just sketches of knowledge.
Yeah, that's usually right.
Because it'll never actually live up to what we think it is. I don't think, or maybe it will. I don't know.
And there's probably going to be
Dune prequels. Dune prequels. Ugh, sorry. Yeah, I just wanted to bring up when they're talking about the list of the God Emperors here. Lo Doke, called Lo Lackwit, the 34th Scarlet Emperor. A seeming simpleton cursed with an affliction that made him jerk and stagger when he walked and drool when he tried to speak, who nonetheless ruled wisely for more than 30 years, though some suggest that the ruler was his wife. That's basically Claudius, the Roman emperor, and I just love the fact that he was, he was like the guy no one ever thought could rule. He wasn't worth assassinating. He stammered and he was an idiot, and yet he survived everybody. He ended up getting poisoned by his third wife, but he didn't rule for 30 years. He ruled for like 24 good years, but he conquered Britain. He had a pretty good run. So I thought this was George's little, homage to Claudius, and we know he's a big fan of Roman history.
So it says since the Long Night, Yeti has been ruled by 11 dynasties. So that's about 4,000 years, I guess. Some of which have lasted a half a century, while others have lasted 700 years. And we don't get all the emperors. We get a few notable emperors throughout Yeti's history. Were there any others that people wanted to point out or thought were interesting?
I like the one who marries a Valyrian and keeps a dragon at court. That'd be like I would be so impressed if you had a dragon at court.
Which one
Yeah.
was that one?
This is the last guy. Chai
Oh,
Duke.
yeah. Holy shit.
The Yellow Emperor, Chai Duck.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's badass.
Yeah, I was surprised there isn't much sort of interactions between Yi and Valeria, because at one point they were the two dominant civilizations of the world. Yet there's never really a war between them the way there was between Valeria and like San or Gis.
Yeah, that's
I'm
just...
guessing
Well, there was
that
no
they were,
Oh.
yeah, geography. They were just far
There
enough
was a-
away from each other
Yeah.
because
Exactly.
E.T. was able to exact tribute from Giscard and Karth, but not Valeria. And so I'm thinking it's just a space difference.
And that I think a really great parallel to that would be, well, there was never a war between the Roman Empire and China,
Yeah.
but because they're just too fucking far apart, and the Roman Empire was too busy dealing with the Parthians and the various Persian-related empires to ever even have to fucking think about like East Asia and China,
It's-
and
it's
vice
actually-
versa.
It was the Parthians that kind of kept Rome from really having contact with China, because at one point the Chinese had an embassy in I think Babylon, and the Romans were on the way, but the Parthians were like, all right, we got to get these guys out of here, because they knew that if they linked up, like, they would be the end for Parthia, and it would open up this whole new like communication. And that was like after that, there was like 500 years before like Italians really ended up getting to China, like to Marco Polo. But it could have happened a lot earlier, but the Parthians said no, not yet.
Yeah. There's an old myth of like this one single legion from Rome that actually made it to China.
Yeah, the Lost Legion.
And kind of like, yeah, and like there's like an ancient myth in Chinese history that talks about like this random group of guys that would fight, that would organize themselves like the scales on a reptile, and a lot of people think that they're making reference to like it's kind of this random ass legion of Romans that made it all the way to China.
Well, yeah, I remember reading about they did some DNA testing on this village, and I forget where it was, but they actually found that they had European blood, and that's where there's a lot of blonde hair, blue eye, Asian people up there, and they think that it might be related to the Lost Legion.
Maybe
Nice.
Tyrion and the Second Sons will like stumble into Yi and have some adventures.
He's got a lot of shit to
Yeah,
do before he
that's
gets to
the
ET.
He'll get there.
That's a whole nother series. But I just thought of a couple interesting like semantic things when it came to the ET section. He talks about, he organizes the emperors based on different gemstones. So like there's like the Pearl Emperor, there's like the Amethyst Emperor, there's the Tourmaline Emperor. And I guess that was, it's curious to me why he chose to organize it in that way as opposed to, like the Han Dynasty, the Ming Dynasty, the whatever dynasty, the Song Dynasty. That's kind of how China was organized, I guess, or how we organize it in history anyway.
Probably because it meant he didn't have to come up with more fake names.
Yeah, those names are hard to remember, but like colors are cool. Everyone remembers colors.
Color code everything.
What happens when you run out of colors? Like,
Well, you go to
eventually
light
you're
green
gonna-
and light blue and light yellow.
You go to-
That's what he did.
You go to
they're
Jeff's.
already like sea green emperor and the blood
Indigo.
red emperor.
He got the
and shit.
indigo. Come on.
They're gonna have to make up new colors. What happens? Their heads will explode.
I found a bit of a crackpot theory on Westeros.org, of all places, and it said that there might be sort of parallels between some of the Yi emperors and Westerosi characters. So I'll just mention a couple. There's the Grey Emperor Ha Loi, whose throne was said to be a saddle, for he spent his entire reign at war, riding from one battle to another. And this is supposedly Robb Stark, who's got the Grey Stark banner, and he spends his entire reign riding from battle to battle.
Please tell
There's
me
also
who
a Greyjoy,
Chok-Chok is.
not
And
an
sorry.
island. You go, Greg.
No, I just want to know who Chok-Chok the Humpbacked was, if you have an answer for that one.
One guy speculates that so he had 100 wives and 1,000 concubines. He'd never sired a son, but only daughters. And possible candidates maybe like Robert Baratheon, who was never able to sire a legitimate heir, or Oberyn Martell, who only sired daughters.
And Maegor the Cruel, because he couldn't get anything.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Oh, yeah, and the Claudius the Fool one, the Scarlet Emperor, Low Duck. This is
Robert
possibly... maybe Tyrion Lannister, who's constantly mocked and misjudged because of his disabilities, yet proves a very effective ruler. But there's also sort of an interesting connection between Claudius and Tyrion, which is that Claudius was apparently killed by eating poisonous mushrooms, and that's like a threat that Tyrion is very wary of in Book 5 before he uses it against one of his own enemies.
Yeah, he was poisoned. He basically was poisoned by like his wife at dinner, and then like she had the physician like smother him with he like stuck a feather down his throat to choke him to death, and that's how he actually.
Oh, I remember that. I remember learning about that in history.
Yeah. Good old Agrippina, Nero's mom. That family had issues.
We had to read historical texts and figure out what was the most likely story, and yeah, it was that feather with the poison in it that she put under their throat or whatever.
Because he didn't need enough of the mushrooms to actually die.
So there's a reference to the 9 eunuchs in that listing of the various emperors of ET. I wonder if that's kind of like a what if like, if you had someone like Varus take over the 7 kingdoms, like how much better it would be to have someone like a eunuch rule, because they would be much more pragmatic and not influenced by hormones,
Well, his stated goal is to keep peace and prosperity, but as we know, behind the scenes, he's fomenting a pretty horrible war in the form of Aegon.
But that will give peace and prosperity.
Yeah.
I choose to believe Varys. I choose to believe Varys when he says he's here to serve the realm.
Yeah, I mean, I believe him, but I don't know. Yeah,
because someone must.
Fanatic.
Do the ends justify the means?
Exactly. Yeah. Maybe they do.
Well, I remember the question I was thinking of before is general how George uses the term dynasty to refer to these various emperors, but at the same time, and that same thing would apply to the various ancient Chinese dynasties that we think of now, but dynasty can also be used like the the Targaryens. That was also a dynasty, right? But no one really there seems to be a difference between like the Targaryen dynasty and like these dynasties. Or am I just mistaking?
You just mean in the names, or in the way they're presented, like in the histories?
Yeah, are they referring to 2 separate things, or are they kind of just referring to the same thing? So if the history of ET had all these different dynasties, does that make a statement about the difference between ET and Westeros? Westeros has basically one dynasty, and ET had all these other ones. So maybe it was much more stability. I'm just curious if what he was trying to imply a different type of idea,
Yeah, but they say that some of these dynasties lasted a generation, some of them lasted 1,000 years. So I think there's just as much, instability here as there. But like I said, this is stuff that's been going on for thousands and thousands of years, where in Westeros it was just small houses and petty kings and, regional kings. There really wasn't an empire until Aegon, right?
And there wasn't a royal dynasty in the sense that it was a single unified realm. It's only been that for the past 300 years, whereas obviously ET's had that for 4,000 years. So there have been a series of royal dynasties. And it seems like, I guess you could interpret as the colors or the gemstones being representative of the house. So there was the Grey Emperor, was one dynasty. So there's the second Grey Emperor, the third Grey Emperor, on and on and on. And they were part of a house, like the Targaryen house or the Stark house or the Lannister house.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think their dynasty and what we call Westeros dynasty, I think they're the same. Just Westeros, you don't really call it a dynasty. Tywin Lannister calls it a dynasty in season 1, but that's in the show.
Not canon.
Not canon.
One thing I thought was interesting was how how many eunuchs was it?
9.
9 eunuchs. They voluntarily castrated in order to focus governance on the realm. And one of the big things they did was build the road network. They constructed roads throughout the realm, and that allowed safe and efficient travel. And I thought that was important, especially as you see in Westeros, for the idea of converting a bunch of disparate kingdoms and settlements into a single realm, because you'd be able to connect it all and travel throughout it. So I thought that was another nice connection between Westeros and ET.
And Valyria, right? Because Valyria had the Valyrian roads.
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
Which helped, connect ancient, all the different parts of Valyria.
And Jaehaerys the First, one of his notable things is he built roads everywhere, and Tywin improved upon them, and they're both remembered as being good rulers.
Yeah, because once you cut travel, you stop trade, you stop shipments of food, and people sort of resort back to that kind of tribalism.
If you want to have cities, you've got to build roads. It
seems like from the encyclopedia, as it stands right now, the 5 forts, that's in the land of ET, correct? So the people who man the 5 forts, these are ET people. Would you agree with me in that assumption?
It's not explained. Yeah, it's not explained what the sort of military situation there, if it is guarded by people anymore, because it might be like the Wall, where it's just a penal colony. It was once this important battlement, but because no one's attacked for thousands of years, it's just become this sort of prison or this place of exile, I guess. It's not really explained one way or the other.
Right, but I mean, where the people who make up that, whether they be prisoners or whether they be military men, from what nation do they come from? I'm assuming they're all from ET, right?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think it
definitely.
has to be ET.
Well, who else would
Yeah.
it be? Because
Right.
they're preventing the lands beyond from coming in. So it's either Jogosnai and Yeti, and I assume the Jogosnai aren't, hanging out in the forts. Although they say they're humongous and.
They could be from Lang. They could be from Southern Lang, or they could be
Yeah,
from.
but at this
Kaya
point, Lang
Kaya,
is like
yeah.
part. At this point, Lang is part of Yeti, right? For like hundreds of years. Like,
Well,
Yeah.
the,
at the
northern
Conde.
part, or the northern 2/3 of Lang is, but the southern 1/3 is independent.
Yeah, I know. But
If
they're
you
not, they're not.
actually
They don't leave their
live there.
island. They're not going to man forts. 1,000 miles.
Yeah,
I mean-
ET's the closest one, so it just makes sense.
I mean, Lang is basically like Dawn. I guess maybe they're technically part of ET, but you don't see many Dornish up at the wall
Yeah.
Right.
because it's just not a big
But-
concern for them.
Right. I mean, it's possible, but it's just geographically not common. But I wonder if there's like a ET version of the Night's Watch that is in charge of the 5 forts. That'd be really interesting to see, because it could just be totally abandoned now. You're right, or it could just be used as like a prison. But who the hell knows? But I would assume if they still use it for defensive purposes, there's got to be some kind of a skeleton force there that fucking tries to keep shit together the way that Night's Watch does now.
I like to think
What
that
is-
everything going on, everything that we know has happened in Westeros, like in the first 5 books since this book came out, someone is writing the Eastern version of it. Like it's all happening here too. So there's a Yeti Jon Snow at the 5 forts. Everything you got the Jogosnar, the Dothraki. It's an Eastern version too. So it's
Like Bizarre World.
Well, it does very much seem like an eastern version of the wall because it's even got the natural landmarks on either side of it that it connects to, and it's described as being 1,000 feet tall, which is even taller than the wall, which
Yeah.
is just insane. Legend says that it might have been raised by the Pearl Emperor, who was the first emperor of ET.
But it
during the
doesn't
founding
really
of
matter
Empire.
how tall they are. They're not connected. I mean, they're connected, but they're 5 forts. It's not a wall. Like they're 5 posts.
No, it's a wall.
Is it said that it's an
I'm-
actual wall, or is it
Yeah.
a wall with 5 like
Sure.
giant guard?
It may not be a continuous wall, but if there's 5 giant forts right next to each other, I think it would serve the same purpose, wouldn't it?
Well, it depends. I mean,
Well, there's a
large enough
zombie
force could get there.
horde coming through. But yeah,
It might
I'm
be-
pretty sure it's a wall.
Yeah, it might be like massive, battlements that are connected by sort of small,
Okay.
strips of
All out.
concrete. I can't imagine they'd leave massive gaps between. So they went to all the effort of making the forts.
There's no wall in the picture. It's just 5 forts.
No, I understand, but like, yeah.
Yeah, so I wonder if Brandon the Builder helped them make it as well, because I know he's been really busy with all the construction that he did in his time.
He built everything, so
Maybe he
must
took-
have built this too.
Maybe he took a train. Maybe he took a flight over to ET and helped them construct this, because it was right after he got done making Storm's End. That's a sarcastic joke, by the way.
It's possible. It's possible.
Stewie laugh.
It is. It's like you say, Greg. There is sort of this parallel happening in contemporary ET because they seem to be undergoing their own civil war because they've got 3 rival emperors. You've got the main emperor, who's the Azure Emperor, Bugai, who still keeps his court in the capital Yin. But you've also got this sorcerer lord who claims to be the 69th Yellow Emperor, who's in Carcosa.
Yeah, you've got that
and
guy
this
that's like
third-
out. He's been outcast or like exiled to somewhere beyond there, right?
That's like
Yeah.
the Knights. He's the one who's really beyond the wall.
And there's this orange emperor called Pol Quo, who's set up a city in Trader Town. So it's interesting.
Right,
like
but
you've got
that's
these rival claimants that are generating the same.
I like to
Really,
think that
though.
he's Tina Turner and it's really Bartertown. And when people come in, he says,
So here's my
Alright.
counter.
Maybe.
Here's my counter argument to that point, Duncan.
Yeah.
It's really not, and the reason why is because that last emperor that you just mentioned from Trader Town, that's basically just Khal Drogo. That's like the eastern version of Khal Drogo. He's a Jogosnai guy who's trying to start his own Jogosnai like kingdom, and the Azure Emperor, that's the real like king, like this. That would be the equivalent of the king of the 7 of Westeros, where they're the actual king that sits on the throne. That guy from Carcosa is in the middle of fucking nowhere, like past the 5 forts. He's like an amalgamation of the Night's King and Mance Raider, the king
Well,
beyond the wall.
Maybe he's like Stannis. He's in exile, sort of, but he's
Yeah,
gathering his
certainly.
He's in Carcosa.
Yeah, well, it's
That's
probably
way beyond the wall. That's way beyond the 5 forts. That's not even fucking in the country. You know what I mean?
maybe he's like the king beyond the wall.
Right, that's my point. And it's
Yeah.
not, but the king beyond the wall, let's be real, was never really a threat to Westeros. It was never really gonna conquer. He was a threat to the wall, but he was never really gonna fucking take over all of Westeros.
He might have taken over the north.
Raymond Redbeard had a pretty good shot at it, but
yeah, I agree with you, Augustine, that the Azure Emperor, he's probably pretty secure in his throne, and these other two are just exiles, guys on the edge of the perimeter, but they're not.
I don't know.
You
Yandel
can't really tell.
Well, the Jogos Naga is not an exile because he's just from a different country. He's a horse person. He's not an exile. He's just the leader of the Jogos Naga. In the same way that Khal Drogo is not an exile of Westeros, he's just the leader of the Dothraki.
He's an invader. He's not a claimant.
Right.
Yeah. But Yandel does keep saying, the Azure Emperor, his power doesn't actually, even though he's worshipped within Yin, his power doesn't really extend beyond the capital, and most of the country is sort of ruled by various, minor warlords and princes and tax collectors and things.
Right. So the real threat to Yin and to the Emperor who lives in Yin would be whoever the leader is in Jinqui, or whoever the leader is in Asabad, or even whoever the leader is in Lang. Those would be the real threats. So those would be the King of the North, or the King in the Reach, or whatever the fuck. You know what I mean? Someone from the Westerlands that want to, the Lannisters who want to take over. Those would be the real threats to the throne in Yin, to me.
Okay. Yeah. Fair enough. It does seem like there is chaos there, though, because I think we hear in Book 4 that Grey Plague has broken out in Yiti. And killing millions of people, and I was wondering if that might be sort of foreshadowing, again, the parallel kind of civilizations, whether it foreshadows what's possibly happening in Westeros with the grayscale.
Oh yeah, the rise of magic, because grayscale is a magical disease.
Because John Connington's infected and he's just landed, and I guess Arianne's going up to meet with him.
Yeah, I wonder if that plague though is more it's more in reference to the Stone Men, or whatever, or if it's more like the Pale Mare. In Marine, where it's actually an infectious illness, not kind of this weird skin thing,
Yeah, it might just be a regular plague, that influenza kind
right.
of.
Some boring Spanish flu or whatever.
Yeah. Not the cool magical stone flu.
I wonder why, it seems like in the Song of Ice and Fire proper, there seem to be a lot more references to Ashai than there are to ET itself. And to me, that doesn't make a lot of sense when you think about it, because ET is a real civilization that's technically closer to Westeros than Ashai. Ashai is who the fuck knows what's happening there. And it's curious to me that there's a lot more references to Ashai, and a lot more people, when Jorah in Book 1, when Jorah proposes to take Dany away and be his wife and just kind of travel in the east, he talks about going to Ashai. It's why the fuck would you want to go there instead of ET? You know what I mean?
Because dragons. I mean,
because Ashai is spooky, and everyone talks about it because it's a spooky place.
That's a good point. It is mentioned so much compared to other much.
Yeah, wouldn't it sound more realistic to say, hey, let's just escape from Westeros and just go to Yin and fucking make a new life there? That to me sounds actually possible. Whereas going to fucking Ashai is crazy talk.
Well, the easy answer is that George probably came up with the Ashai way before he came up with the idea of Yeti, and maybe he didn't know that they were right next to each other.
But Ashai is just crazy. You can just do whatever you want in Ashai. It's the drug sex capital of the world.
That's why I said. That's why I said Ashai is Portland. Right there we go.
It's international waters out there.
Right, but at the same time, in Ashai, it's also so toxic that an animal can't even live there. So does that sound like the kind of place you'd want to retire? That sounds awful. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Horses can't survive. Mules can't survive. There's no riding animals there. So it's you can't even grow food there, for God's sake. How nice of a place could it be?
Doesn't Daxos say he wants to take her to Yiti on his pleasure barge? And then
they want to make a tour of all of the East, I think.
And Jade Sea, yeah.
He says they can find the lost city of poets and sip the wine of wisdom from a dead man's skull.
Yeah.
It's very mystical, yeah.
Should we go on to Lang?
Yeah, sure.